And it's a system-based approach. So like you look at a human health, you don't have to have cancer and diabetes and lung disease to be a high risk of mortality. So same thing with the house. You don't have to have all these things to be potential to be ignitable. But you need to address these things. And there's a lot of little small things you can do.
And what's some of your diagnosis about what happened with Malibu and how that all happened? It wasn't as much as fast as Paradise, but it certainly went through areas that people never thought were going to get got. Or maybe they did know.
That was about to say, the Malibu area, they've had so many fires in that area, the ecosystem has actually changed. It's not what we would have seen 100 years ago. Because the chaparral, it has mechanisms by which it can be happy, and it looks like complete death and destruction of the landscape. And I tell my students, it's like, you see nothing out there but blackened earth. How much of the plants died? And they're all like, well, everything. And it's like, well, actually, no. Very few of those plants actually died. And they're like, well, what are you talking about? Well, the underground half and the roots, they survived, and then they've got these mechanisms by which they sprout back up and grow back. And they can handle that after, just kind of being hit on sort of a every 20, 30-year basis. That's historic. But down in Malibu, they've had so many fires, all people started, is that these plants just hadn't had a chance to respond. They just don't have enough energy to get going. And so you're starting to develop areas that the native chaparral in a lot of places are going away, and the only things that are coming back is like grasslands or other shrubs that are very fire prone. They can live in that, and that just facilitates more fires through.
And these are the invisibles to a modern who's not really acquainted with the true nature of the landscape, the topography.
Yeah, it gets fascinating being in my field, because I pick out notes and just about the ecosystem and looking around, and I get frustrated sometimes watching TV. It's like, that's not Kentucky, that looks like San Bernardino. Just knowing the ecosystems.
So there's various components that will allow fire. There were huge winds, for instance, in these conditions too. Or the fires create even more wind when they start to move through. Am I right? And there's the hillsides. Right. Yeah. So what are the different components that come together to make it?
Well, in my world, wildland fire behavior comes down to fuels, the weather, and the topography. And so places like we see in Malibu and in Paradise and others is that you had these hot, strong winds that were being aligned in the same direction of these steep canyons, and the winds just sort of got funneled through those areas and just made more intensity. Fuels, we've seen changes through time. With the forest that normally you would have these periodic, very low intensity, happy fires, as I say, that clear out the undergrowth. We haven't had that, and so we've had a buildup of fuels. So now there is no such thing in a lot of places as a nice little happy fire. It's going to be a very angry fire when it comes through, because it hadn't had fire in 100 years, and you just accumulated 100 years worth of vegetation and down dead sticks and whatnot. But a big part of the fuels that they forget about, though, are the homes themselves. To a fire, it looks at vegetation. That's a fuel,
Right.
It looks at a home. It's fuel. It's a physical process, and it's looking for something to combust. And if our homes are built in kind of substandard ways, which a lot of houses in California are, because they were built before the new building codes are up, it's just that they're very susceptible.
And they can get by weather-wise, where a colder, snowy climate or something
right,
would have to be more enforced or something. So I have this sort of notion that, barn raising, they used to do barn raising, probably still do in Amish country, where it's like, instead of like everybody gets to it eventually, way off in the future, when they finally have time, I imagine that there could be these really amazing neighborhood sort of actions that could take place, where everybody comes together and they just handle it on a weekend or something, you know, and all of California could do that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
These are the kind of things I see all the time. It seems more efficient and also serves this whole community building thing, you know, like you'd actually get to know your neighbors. And I wonder, you know, I just think that, you know, so we've got this pressure of these horrible situations, but we have the opportunity that's built into them to take some action and to go someplace that takes us up in our human experience, you know. So I would love to somehow marry these ideas of the art of living and our creativity in with this present, you know, got people's attention situation with fire management. Mitigation is the kind of the main word, right? We want to mitigate.
Right, so we want to mitigate that risk, bring the risk down lower, different actions we can take.
Okay. So I would love to do that. I feel like that's, you know, that was the juice for me coming together with you. So where do you see us going in the months and years ahead, in terms of, you know, like a practical steps forward, and you know, certainly you're being called all over the planet right now to address this kind of stuff. You do see like a near future that we could step into that you'd like to share with us, your vision?
Oh, my vision. If I ran the zoo. Right?
Yes, I point you.
Well, it's a community that we can, you know, coexist, you know, with nature. It's not we're trying to beat back nature. It's like, how can we coexist with nature? How can we coexist with one another? And so being able to, if we can get into this community standpoint where we're working together for a common solution, you know, that benefits everyone, not only from a fire thing, but it also benefits us as people, you know, as humans, working together. You know, it is sometimes tough because there are all these competing voices and everyone's on an electronic device and whatnot and kind of expecting other people to do it. But I have seen it in communities, even in our local area, where there's a champion that, hey, we've got an issue, let's come together, and, you know, and afterwards let's all get together and have a barbecue together. And so it's a win-win. It's a community building at the same time. It's keeping the community safer at the same time.
And how did this course that you offer come about at Cal Poly? Can they, well, actually more, how can someone find out? Do they go online to?
Well, it is a senior capstone course. It's Wildland and Urban Interface, Fire Protection, big wording there. And it was actually started by a good friend of mine, Dan Turner, who was the fire chief for CAL FIRE in this county for 15, 20 years, for a long time. And, you know, he took it from the approach, it's like, you know, the real issue, it's the fires burn across the landscape, you know, oh, it's sad, it's not good. But let's talk about consequences. Let's talk about the effects it has on people. And we need to be training our, you know, this bright, innovative, you know, group of people that have that think differently than you and I. They come up with different solutions. Let's not tell them that this is the way you do it. It's like, all right, here's the issues, here's some things to think about. You figure it out. What are you going to do? And then I've been absolutely astounded that these young minds come up with, it's like, wow, I never would have thought of that. That's awesome. And it's really cool because it's working with the local communities, because we actually develop a plan for a local community every year, and then they take that basis, the work that the students did, and then they turn around and they actually get grants to implement the very things that the students suggested. So it's really a neat thing to watch.
I'm so glad I asked that. I'm so glad, because that was my crowning moment in my university experience, was when I got to have the live, work, you know, learn all together. So Professor Chris Dicus, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks. All righty.